I guess I probably should have started with myself. I'm Tracy. I work here at Oliver Van Dyke in the commercial insurance lines. So we have Bill from Rehmann Group speaking about the controls you can put in place at your company. And then we've got Amy from Travelers Insurance. She's going to be speaking on if you have a hack, you have a breach, how does insurance respond to that, and how Travelers can help you out with that. And then we have an attorney coming. She's on her way. She's running late, but she's from a firm downtown, and she's going to be speaking on some of the regulations with cyber. And she's defended quite a few court cases, and she's probably the one that will scare you the most if Bill has it. So thank you all for coming again, and we're going to save our questions to the end. So we're going to have all the speakers speak, and then whatever questions you have, we'll just have them all come up here and have a kind of an open discussion. Any questions? All right, Bill, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be out here. I apologize first out. I have a little bit of cold. Who doesn't these days here? So if I get too quiet and you can't hear me, but normally I speak pretty loud. I just put some things up there. This is who I am. Rehmann, a large accounting firm, 900 people in the accounting firm. We have a big office in Grand Rapids, but I'm not an accountant. I'm actually a lawyer by education. I'm a recovering attorney. I never practiced law. I got out of law school, got right into the FBI. I did 26 years of special agent with the FBI, and that's where I became a threat expert, if you will. I'm not a software developer. I can't write code. So you think, why am I here talking to you about cyber? Well, it's because I'm a threat expert. I know where the threats come from. I did a lot of terrorism work, a lot of counterintelligence work, and my job is to learn where you're threatened and then to find out how we counter those threats. So that's what you're going to hear a little bit more. Appreciate the introduction, but my job here today is more than just tell you what's going on here. It's to scare the hell out of you. This is a scary world out there, and then with our insurance folks and our lawyers, they'll kind of tell you what happens if you do get a breach. So these are all the things inside the Rehmann, the accounting firm, 900 people. I have a group of about 300 people, and these are some of the things we do. If you have any questions afterwards, I can certainly answer those for you. Hoping this is going to work. Maybe not. When we talk about the cyber cases here too, let me ask. I have to advance this. In the past couple of days, can one of you guys kind of help me? Oh, there it goes. Have we heard anything in the cyber world in terms of breaches? I'll tell you here, this morning on the news, the Director Mueller, former Director Mueller, is doing this investigation on all things Russian and Trump. And what did we learn from that investigation here that's digital related? They actually posted documents to a defense attorney, somebody that they're prosecuting against. They posted documents so that they could have access to their portal. Think in terms of a share file or PDFs or something like that. These defense attorneys were looking at that. Somebody hacked in, not through Director Mueller's special counsel's office, but through the attorney's office, got into the portal, got into the documents, and changed all the documents and then posted them online. So when you think in terms of, are you exposed? It's not just, are you exposed, but when you share things with other people, does that exposure have a chance to hurt you? What else did we learn in the past 2 days? And I love current events. This brings it home here too. 14-year-old kid, I believe in Wisconsin. You ever FaceTime? I FaceTime with my grandkids all the time. You ever FaceTime? This 14-year-old found a flaw in FaceTime. So in general sense, they're still looking at it. But if I call you on FaceTime, in those 7 or 8 seconds before you pick up the phone, I'm in your portal. I can see and I can hear anything you're talking about before you pick up the phone, before you pick up the connection. This 14-year-old kid found this flaw and called and said, we got a problem here, and they blew her off. And it wasn't until they ended up filing as a developer. You have to pay like $200 to be a developer, and then they filed as a developer, and then they send the antidote. And they said, oh, you guys are right. We have this flaw. So you're going to see some litigation out of that too. It's interesting, but these are the kids that are figuring out where our flaws are in these days here too. Cybercrime. This is just a statistic here too, and I think this will be available to you guys if you want to see it. In 2017, about 8 billion records. Anybody here been a victim of identity theft? Well, you guys all lie. You all have. You all have. Anybody shop at Target? Anybody shop at Home Depot? Anybody ever stay at a Marriott hotel? You're a victim. I work for the government. OPM was hacked by the North Koreans. So when we did all our backgrounds to determine if I get a top secret, I had a top secret clearance and everything, the North Koreans got in there and they got that Not only did they get all my records, but when the FBI did the background for a clearance, they interviewed my neighbors, and my family, and my friends in the North Korea, had all their information too. Because every FBI write-up says, I interviewed John Smith at this address, his date of birth is this. So now they have all their information too. So, anybody been a victim of IRS? Somebody file your IRS documents before you have? You guys are good then, because normally in a room this size, I'd see 5 or 6 people that have had their income taxes filed by somebody who stole their identity. And this is the time of year this happens. So this is the reality of data breaches. The first half of 2018, we don't have any records past July. That's a big number. These are just the breaches. 18 million records lost or stolen every single day. It used to be about 10 years ago that the bad guys would steal an identity, steal records, social security numbers, dates of birth, and they'd use it right away to create a bank account or something like that because it had value and it was the timeliness was important. Now they've got so many. It's just envision a digital world where they steal this information, then they put it on a digital shelf, and then they use it some later date, or they sell it on the black market because there's value on it. When the Home Depot breach occurred, when it was discovered sometime after it occurred, but we have people, the Bureau and other people have, they're on the black market looking for these things. The price of identities that were stolen from Home Depot were going for about $21 an identity on these black sites. And then once it was publicized, it went down to about $3 an identity that the bad guys could buy it. So publication is important because it lowers the price and lowers the demand for this stuff. Where is the industry? Who's doing this stuff? It's not some 16-year-old kids in the basement of mom and dad's house, but it is. It's mercenaries, freelancers, terrorists, other governments. The Chinese are kicking our butt. Russia's still kicking they're stealing all this information, they use it. If you have a company that's got global ties, or if you're a vendor of say an automotive manufacturer and you've got ties all over the world, do you think that your information is safe in China or in South Korea even, or Russia or anything like that, down in South America? Every day we see cases where your vendors are getting breached, your contacts are getting breached, and they're using that ability to get into their systems to get into yours. And I'll talk a little bit about how they do that, how they attempt to get your money through their breaches. What do the bad guys want? They want to know who you are, how much money you have, health insurance information. The largest growth area in cyber theft right now is health information. We actually have in urban areas like Detroit, Chicago, New York, hackers are stealing health insurance information to give or sell to lower income individuals so that they can get health care. So if I can't afford health care, or I don't want to pay for health care, or I don't have a job that provides that health insurance, and go on the black market, I can get somebody else's card, Bill Kowalski's card, and belong to Blue Cross or Anthem or someplace else. I can go to a doctor, or I can go get a wheelchair, or I can go get some other good, and then I pay with Bill Kowalski's insurance card and I walk away. I can go in the hospital and get treatment. I can go to the pharmacist if I get a script and buy OxyContin or fentanyl or other opioids. We're seeing that all the time. Largest growth area in cyber theft is health insurance information. They want your social security number, your date of birth. I mean, that's the key to the kingdom here too, but we give our social security number to everybody, don't we? My wife, actually, she hates coming to my presentations because I pick on her all the time, but my kids were in high school. They're now older now. My kids were in high school, and both my son and my daughter play sports. Anybody have kids in high school? They play sports. They give you this health form, and it says, tell me everything about your kids, so if you're not there and they get hurt, we can get them health care. There's a spot there that says, I want your kids' social security number. And I wouldn't give it. My wife says, oh, you're going to make the school, man. The school calls and says, you didn't complete the form. And I says, why do you need my kids' social security number? Well, because it's on the form. You don't need it. Academic institutions are a huge, huge target for cyber criminals because of that information here. They possess that information, especially in college. Anybody fill out a FAFSA for your kids to go to college? First, you got to bleed on that form. You tell them everything, every dollar you ever spent, where it goes, where it keeps there. you imagine hacking into a university that has all those FAFSA forms and what kind of information I can get if I'm a bad guy? Same thing in high schools. And kids are a great target. If I can steal a 14 and 13-year-old's identity and to create a credit profile for them and get credit cards, how great is that? They've got perfect credit. Nobody knows, when do you find out that your kid's identity has been stolen to create another credit profile? When they turn 16 and start driving and you want to get them a shell or a mobile card, they apply for that card and all of a sudden one of the credit companies comes back to you and says, he's got bad credit because somebody else has been using their information. So kids are a gold mine, especially kids of wealthy families. This is what they do with your data. Mostly now they're stealing it and selling it because there's less risk in just stealing the data. If I'm a bad guy, I can steal it and sell it. The greater risk is if I try to use it and I'm out there. So they hire mules or they just sell the information to other people here too. And one of the big things they're doing now is they're getting information to get into your business. Because they asked, years ago when the FBI used to investigate bank robberies, we still do, but not as much. And I still say we, I'm still an agent in there. They asked the bank robberies, why do you rob banks? That's where the money is. Why do you hack businesses? Because that's where the money is. There's no threats over there. It doesn't pay to do any armed robberies anymore here when you can sit at a computer in somebody's basement and get in this way here too. If I hack into your business, there's no telling what I can find, what I can get. And I'll show you a couple of the ways that they're doing it. These are some of the recent significant cyber cases. Again, this is available to you. I don't want to spend too much on your time. It just shows that no one's completely safe from this thing. You can do a lot of things to protect yourself and mitigate the damage, but some of the best companies in the world, Facebook, Google, Yahoo. Anybody have a Yahoo account? Millions of Yahoo accounts going out there. You think about what's in your Yahoo account. Equifax, again, when you think you have it, your information is not out there. If you have a credit card, chances are you were breached and your information was sold in the Equifax breach. Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian are the three credit card companies. Anytime you apply for a credit card, you have to go through them. Equifax got hacked. And I'll jump a little bit ahead of myself here too. We'll talk a little bit about patching, how the Equifax breach occurred. It's because one person failed to do their job, and they let the bad guys in, and millions and millions of account information and identities were stolen from that information. You guys, I assume, are all small businesses. Perfect target audience for this. You guys get attacked more than anybody else. If you're a business, and again, I do small, mid-sized businesses, 50 to 1,000 people. Got this here. Why are you the best target for the bad guys? Because if I'm Mobil Oil, or if I'm the big banks, or if I'm General Motors, I've got a team. I've got thousands of people whose job it is to keep my email running, to keep my systems running, and to provide cybersecurity. If you're a small business, I'm guessing you either outsource your IT, or you might have one person, maybe two, whose job it is to make your IT work. And what's their first job? Make sure I get my emails. Make sure the system stays up and running. Make sure when I travel, I can VPN and get in. So when they talk to you about, boss, we need to strengthen our IT security posture, yeah, my email's got to keep working. I got to keep going out there. We'll give you a couple of bucks for that, but it's not the most important thing. I would suggest to you that IT security is a revenue enhancer, because the more secure you are, the less likely you are to get attacked, the less likely you are to get money. This is I did a post-mortem of cyber attack. When you get cyber attacked, you get email compromise, you get ransomware, you get breached. Let's assume, for the purposes of this discussion, that it's because of employee error, which it always is. Some weak employee made the mistake and then let somebody in. So first month, you get bad publicity, the word's out there, you have to tell your clients maybe, and you have to pay somebody like me to bring in a team of lawyers like Jennifer. You have to contact your insurance people, you have to do breach repair and find out where the flaws are and make sure the barn door is closed so nobody's still getting in there anymore. That's costly. And then you have to figure out what you lost. You might have to tell your clients. You know, we lost your information. We weren't a good steward, so that we lost your information. You may have lost money. And then Jennifer will talk later about notification and compliance. When you actually have to tell your vendors, your employees, and anybody in your database, hey, I wasn't a good steward of your information. I lost your identity, and what you have to do according to that here. Very costly and very time consuming here too. Then you might get sued. You might want to sue them. You have lost reputation, and then you lose clients. Because if you're a client, if I'm your client, and there's other competitive businesses out there, and you have to call me and notify me that you didn't take care of me, and you lost my information, am I going to stay with you? Or am I going to go to one of your competitors that's going to do a better job? It's hard to tell. 60% of small businesses go out of business within 6 months of an attack. 60%. Big number. A lot of it's the cost, a lot of it's the reputational damage. A lot of it's just the money that goes out. This is I put up here as an example of an insider threat. These are more rare now than the hackers. Most people think that if you have a breach, somebody from the outside against it in the basement get into you. But there are insider threats too that can harm your company. So we put out there before you have an IT employee, before he resigns or is fired, or he or she knows they're going to be fired, he deletes critical files, changes passwords, and then locks other people out of their system. He wipes his laptop, leaving no trace, and then he's gone. You fire him or whatever else. Oftentimes, these IT employees, there are greater precautions you should take if you fire somebody in IT, because most of these, and I say kids, I don't mean that as a pejorative. If I'm a kid and I'm good at IT and I'm looking for a job, and I come to your company, what's one of the first things I'm going to do? I'm going to create a backdoor in your network, in your system, so that when it hits the fan and everything shuts down and I can't get back in, I've got a way to get back in. So that when you walk them out the door 10 years later because they're doing something bad, that backdoor still exists and they have a way to get in, and you have to be very careful about that here too. So there's always extra precautions to take when you fire or an IT employee resigns that you have to do here too. This individual worked for a railway company, and they had no idea what he had done in terms of damage. He reallocated routes. He would have caused a lot of damage, but they did diverted the disaster was diverted by somebody addressing a network problem, found the problem, and they ended up stopping a bunch of the trains and deliveries over there, and they brought in a team like ours to fix it. So they could do a lot of damage. That should scare you. For the first time since 2008, inadvertent data exposure. By inadvertent data exposure, that just means that somebody clicked on a link, somebody got into your system, some of your information becomes public. You're very careful in terms of public relations, or advertising, or website development, what you get out there, what you want the public to see so that it's the positive spin. But when your bad stuff gets out there, you have tremendous reputational damages. One of the things my firm does is what we call reputational management. If you do a Google search on your company, it's like 95% of the people that do a Google search don't look beyond the first page results. So you want to make sure that those first 2 or 3 things are positive things when they Google your company. So we have the ability, it's a convoluted process, but I can move those bad Google results down to the 2nd or 3rd page. I can't get rid of them, but you can move them so that they're not the first thing that people come up here to, because reputational damage is a very important thing for you. And this is what we always talk about: educating your employees. Employees are definitely the weakest link in cyber matters. They're not educated as to what they should do and shouldn't do. They don't secure their devices. I can't tell you how many times somebody takes their laptop home and it's stolen out of their car while they stop for a drink on the way home, and it's not properly coded or encrypted. Somebody gets that information. I mean, there's nothing you can do to recover that data. They don't follow corporate policies. Worse, do you have a corporate policy? I can't tell you how many times I'm called in to do an investigation. There's a couple questions I ask first. I want to know the name of your insurer, because I want to talk to them to see if there's a chance that you have cyber insurance and I might get paid. And then I want to talk to your lawyer because we're going to talk in terms of this is where we are, and this is where the notifications have to come in, and lawyers understand where the problems are. And then I want to see all your policies. I can't tell you how many times I go into a company, and when they pull up their policies, they don't even have a policy on mobile devices, cell phones, because their policy was written by their HR department back in 1998. And who knew about cell phones? Who knew what the policies were going to be? Is that your phone? Or I shouldn't call it. I never call it a phone. It's a mobile device here too. I mean, 16% of the people that own a mobile device actually use it to make phone calls. Nobody uses those devices. I think I'm the only one that uses it for phone calls. I don't play any games or have too many apps out there. But kids nowadays, they text. They use apps. They don't use it for phones. But is that your phone? Do you pay for it? Do you give them a stipend? If I come in and say, you got a bad employee, they've done something wrong, I want their phone so I can do a digital forensics on it to see what they were doing and what they were downloaded, their phone or their iPad or other device. Can I do that legally? You have a policy that says, I'm giving you $60 a month to pay for your phone bill. Your phone number is yours, but the device is mine. Then you can take it away from them. And then I can do a digital forensics on it and I can find out what's going on. So you need to look at your policies, talk to your HR people, make sure that's all updated. Do you have a policy on social media? I'm sitting at my desk or I'm tapped into you from a remote location through VPN. Can I check my Facebook account or my social media account? Different firms have different policies. But if I'm at work and I'm checking social media, the opportunity for bad guys to get into your systems, social media, especially if an employee clicks on a link on Facebook, which about 90% of the links on Facebook are malware, then you know who's got liability on that here. So you have to have these policies, you have to develop. People use company data. I'm just going home. It's a bad day. It's a snow day. It's cold out there. They work from home. I'll go work from home there, and I won't use a VPN or a secure line. I won't have encrypted data. I'll just do it on an open line, or I'll send some emails to my Yahoo account or my Gmail account. I work with all my Excel spreadsheets and all the numbers and everything, and then I'll work on it when I get home. Huge problem. We know Yahoo's been breached. If I send that information to an unsecure account and then work at it at home, bad guys see all that information. You should have a policy against that. Viruses through social media, work email to personal account, and clicking on links and emails. I mean, employees are definitely the weakest link here too. We have at Rehmann, and you should have, if you don't have, we use a company called Security Mentor. I'm not selling anything here, so you don't have to, but every month I get a new video. It's made for Rehmann. It's kind of animated, and it talks about all the different threats, and would you recognize this as malware? Would you click on this link? It's fantastic. They do a great job. I would suggest if you don't have some educational tool where at least once a quarter you're sending it to your employers, you're calling your employees in and say, this is the latest and greatest, and this is what you need to be aware of so you don't click on the wrong link or do the wrong thing. You're opening yourself up to vulnerabilities, and it shouldn't be that way. You need to keep teaching your employees. You can't scare them enough, and that's why I love these opportunities here. I love scaring people simply because that forces you to take action and maybe do something so that you're better protected in the end. These are the formulas for cybercrime. Everybody knows about phishing. Phishing has gotten so much more sophisticated. It used to be that you'd get an email that looked like, you know, it'd be under the Verizon website or banner. It would say Verizon, your account has been changed. We've suffered a breach, or Comerica Bank or whatever, we suffered a breach. Click on this link and give us new information and give us a new, we'll establish a new password or something like that. They were pretty good, but people would click on them, type in their password, and it wasn't going to Verizon or Comerica Bank. It was going to the bad guys. It was going to the bad guys here too. Now the phishing is much more sophisticated. They get into your system, they learn about you, and they more what's called spear phishing now. So they learn what you like and where you look. There are things called honey holes now where they'll wait because they know that Bill Kowalski likes to golf. And I'll go on my computer every once in a while and look for the greatest bargains and the golf courses and everything like that. So if they got into my computer, they might set something out at a golf site, waiting for me to go there, just so I would click on a link, and then malware would be put into my system. They're patient, they've got a lot of data, and they're very good at knowing who their targets are. We'll talk in a minute about ransomware and unpatched system, but malware is the big word. Once it gets into your system, they pretty much have you. Anybody ever been the target of ransomware? This is actually one of the old times here. They now use a skull and crossbones or something like that here. Just in essence, what ransomware is, on Friday evening, all my 50 employees leave the office, they turn off their computers, everything's good to go. On Monday morning, we come back in, nobody can get into their computer save for one person. And one person on one device, this comes up and says, haha, we got you. Or skull and crossbones will come up and say, haha, we got you. We've encrypted all your data. And if you want the key to de-encrypt all your data so you can see all your files, send us money. Send us money. When this first started against them 10 years ago, they would ask for $800 or $900, usually in Bitcoin or cyber currency. And then don't tell law enforcement, and people wouldn't. So they would find a way to pay the money. They'd call a firm like us or call Jennifer or Travelers, and then we'd pay them in Bitcoin, and then they'd get the de-encryption key because there's honor among thieves. Because they know that if they don't give the key back to you, so you de-encrypt your thing, the word will spread that you're really bad guys and it doesn't pay to pay them. So that's no good either here. So that they did have that honor. Now it's so competitive out there in terms of ransomware. Now they're asking for $100 grand, and half the time they're not even giving you the key to de-encrypt afterwards. So your first call should be to law enforcement out there. But they encrypt your files, and then you need the key here. What's the solution? Back up your data. It's a simple thing. If they encrypt my files, and on Friday evening, if once a week, or at Rehmann we do every 24 hours, we back up our files. So if I back up my files on Friday night at 5 o'clock, and then they got in on Saturday morning, I say, too bad. I just shut them out, reboot all my network, and what did I lose? I lost that 4 hours on Saturday morning. All of my other data is backed up and I can get it. There was a police agency in Maine that got hit, and they backed up their files once a month. There was a law firm in Massachusetts that backed up their files every 2 weeks. Got hit by ransomware, paid the ransom, didn't get the de-encryption key. 73 attorneys billing 60 hours a week for 2 weeks, and all their data was gone. How do you bill your client? No, and everything. You think about how much money they lost out there simply because they weren't backing up. Very important. It's a simple solution. And if you do get hit, you can fix it. For ransomware, 1 in 5 small businesses who paid the ransom never got their data back. That number's going up. And a business is attacked every 2 minutes. It's so simple. And how does ransomware start? Employee error. Somebody clicks on a link. Somebody lets the bad guys in. They get in. They sit there and wait. They put the malware into the system, and then they wait for a perfect time to hit you. Anybody read about this one? Atlanta got hit with ransomware? I actually find this slightly humorous, because when Atlanta got hit by ransomware, they had a bunch of young kids working for them, and they say, for 2 weeks we have to go to paper files. And the kids didn't know what the hell they were talking about. We don't know how to fill out these forms. We don't know where to put these. They couldn't even send out things by mail because they'd never stamped the letter. Where we're coming from, I don't know, but they're filling out the forms by hand. They lost a ton of money. They demanded $51,000 of ransom. Cost the city of Atlanta about $3 million to fix the problem. And that was all because an employee clicked on a link, let a bad guy in, and they had the ransomware attack. Did you guys suffer a $3 million loss? City of Atlanta couldn't. There's a big one now too, and this is growing too. Business email compromise. Anybody been a victim of this? I don't mean to poke anybody in the eye on this here too, but this is huge. This is huge here now here too. In essence, the way this works is they get into your system again through some employee or somebody clicks on a link, they'll get in. And my title at Rehmann is Director of Operations for my group. So they're looking for people like me. They're looking for CEO. They're looking for CFO, because if they get into your email, what they do is they watch and see. And these email compromises are so inventive. These guys are very talented, because what they'll do is they'll watch and wait. They'll see who I correspond with. If you're a CFO, who do you order? All right, we need to wire transfer money. Which vendors talk to you about we're changing our bank account information? Overseas, it happens a lot. If you're an automotive company and you're dealing in China or Japan, They change their bank accounts regularly, so those emails are very common at what you get over there. So they sit and wait, and then when Bill Kowalski leaves his office and travels to Wyoming, Michigan, and spends a couple of days out here, they'll send an email late on what was yesterday? Wednesday? Late on a Wednesday night saying, I was out in Wyoming, I had dinner with these people, great potential client, I want to lock down the relationship because we got competition. Wire them $25,000 now so we can lock this down. I'll explain to you when I get in the morning. My secretary looks at the email. It's Bill Kowalski at Rehmann.com. It's right. She doesn't want to call me because she knows the weather sucks and she wants to get home. She doesn't want to bother all this. So what does she do? Hit send. The money's gone. When I get back to my office later today, she's going to say, all right, give me all the details on that new client. Everybody's so excited about it. What's my response to her? I don't know what you're talking about. So they get in and spoof your email. Oftentimes now they're using your real email, but my email is bill.kowalski@Rehmann.com. They do it, Bill, instead of the 2 L's, one of the L's will be the numeral 1. .Kowalski@Rehmann.com. Who's going to notice that when you look at it real fast? They send you an email, and they often put things in it like, because they're sitting there watching my email, they'll put, how did your son do at his hockey game last night or two? Or, is your wife feeling better because I knew she was sick? And when you get an email, it is good because they know a lot about you. And they ask you to wire this money. And then they say, here's the bank account information. So they do a lot of this stuff here too. In 2018, the projection was it'll be close to $10 billion now in business email compromise losses. You would think if I'm a CEO or CFO, I'm not going to wire that money until I know it. What's the solution? We call it dual authentication. Your people should never push that button and send that wire transfer without picking up a phone and saying, boss, I just got this email from you. They don't because they're afraid of you, because the timing is bad, some other reason. I went to lunch with a guy that ran a private equity company over the day. While we were walking to lunch, we met his banker in the streets of Birmingham. And the guy says, yeah, I'm heading back to the office. I'm getting ready to send that wire transfer out. I'll give you a call in a little bit. And the guy says, what are you talking about? It was fortuitous that we had run into each other because the banker was getting ready to send the wire transfer and this guy hadn't ordered it. And this was a perfect opportunity for me to say, see, I mean, if you had not run into your banker, that money would have been sent. And it was just dumb luck to save these guys. So it happens all the time. These are one of the things I wanted to talk real quick. I don't have too much more time here too, but I wanted to talk about the Equifax breach because that's so informative and educational over here too. And you need to talk to your IT department. So I've already instructed you to talk to HR. So I'm giving you a task now too, but your IT department too. Equifax happened for lack of a patch. What happens is, and again, I tease my wife all the time here. I don't use the computer much at home, but on occasion I do. And the weather's been bad. I took time off for the holidays, and I go on our laptop, and in the bottom corner, what's flashing is we have Semantic, and it says you have an update. Download the update, the security update to update your system. So I asked her, I said, how long that's been going on? She says, a couple of weeks. I said, why don't you update it? And she says, well, it shuts everything down for 45 minutes and it takes so long and everything else. I'll get to it when I get to it. Pretty much what happened at Equifax. Symantec, McAfee, Norton's, all these security companies, they discover flaws in the software and they create a patch to fix it. And they send that patch out to everybody so that when you download the information, it fixes your computer and the bad guys can't get in again. Well, they did this. Actually, a flaw was discovered, and they sent it to everybody. And there's one guy working for Equifax whose job it was to patch their systems whenever these security things came out. There happened to be 7 patches that came out that day. He did 6 of them, didn't do the last one, came in the next morning, forgot about it, and for 10 days, Equifax was unpatched. On the 3rd day, the bad guys realized that patch had gone out. Not everybody did it. They have an algorithm. They found out who didn't put the right patch in, and they were into Equifax's system. And that's the keys to the kingdom. You get into credit card agency. I don't know if that poor guy is still working anywhere, but it tells you here, you need to tell your IT people when they get those patches, they have to put them on. They have to negotiate them right away because they're telling you, you are vulnerable. But we will fix it for you. We will fix it for you. There's been at least one occasion I know of where bad guys have gotten into the security software and sent patches again, pretending to be Norton's or McAfee or Symantec, saying click here because this is your latest patch. So when you get those notifications, you don't just click on the email link that you get. You go to Norton's website, or you go to Symantec, or you do some research to find out if the patch is right, and you go in that way because it's much better for you. And this is the other thing. If you got a weak network, you got to upgrade it. When your IT people come to you and say, boss, I need money because we're insecure, our VPN isn't strong enough, bad guys are hitting us, you have to make the determination, do I want to lose $3 billion when I get hit, or do I want to spend $50,000 now to secure my network back? It's all important stuff. Now, I know there's going to be other stuff here. I've got some the cyber insurance stuff on here, but I know that that's going to be talked about, and I'm going to stick around afterwards so I can ask you questions. But the one thing I wanted to emphasize, if you get for small businesses, you guys are the #1 target. You guys are the #1 target because you do not have the wherewithal to have a strong security team and posture whose only job it is to secure your network day after day after day. They do the best they can, and they're very talented individuals, so that's what you need to have. You got to have that, and you guys possess information that the bad guys want. Think of every vendor in your system that you've ever paid money to. Think of every employee, not just that you have, that you've ever had. And you may have been in a profit sharing system, or if you paid in the past. If you have to notify employees that their data has been out, you just don't notify current employees that their information has been out here too. And Jennifer will talk about this. You have to notify any employee who's ever worked for you whose name and identification remains in your system. So you might have to go back 15 years to find out those individuals. Very costly. Very costly. So educate your employees, talk to your IT department, talk to HR, make sure your policies are up to date here too. You know, I could tell I'd love all you guys. I'd love to have a beer with you and just group around here too, but I quite frankly don't want to get a call from you, because I'd rather you talk to Jennifer or Travelers Insurance ahead of time and make sure you're secure. You call me, it's too late, because my team's going to come in. We're going to fix the breach. We're going to tell you what you need to do. We're going to tell Jennifer what information's been gotten out there so that she can provide the notifications and things. But at that point, it's going to cost you money. We'll fix your system, but it's too late over there too. We'd rather do. And Rehmann does with our partner, Trivalent, is not part of Rehmann. We do some securing the systems. We can come in and do an assessment to see how bad you are. I have white hat hackers that we do a lot for the banking community, financial community. Banks are required to actually test their systems regularly, so we'll go in and do some white hat hacking to see if we can breach in. And I'll leave you with this here. My favorite technique of all is that we used to go in, we do some social, we call it social engineering. We can dumpster dive and find information. We do things like that. But we don't do this anymore here too. Imagine this here. We used to go in and leave a thumb drive or an external drive on the secretary's desk. And it would have a little yellow sticky note on it that says C-suite payroll or executive salary or something on there. And what administrative assistant isn't going to take that thumb drive and pop it into their computer and say, I want to see what the boss is making. And the minute they do, we're in, because there's malware in that system, malware in that thumb drive here too. It worked about 75% of the time. We still do, we send emails, phishing emails when we do IT audits of companies. And we learn enough about the company where we send these into, and right now, we're about 72% employees click on the links that we send them. And I'd like to see that number down in the 20s. So that's how we educate people without embarrassing them. So you got to tell your people every day, don't click on these links. So, with that having been said, I think that's my time. There's more on here too, but we'll see if we can't move this to. You have yours up here. And I know there'll be questions afterwards. I'm very happy to stay. I don't want to get back on the roads anytime soon.
Thank you, Bill.
Very good.
We'll take a 5-minute break. Bathrooms are just down the hallway here to the left after the staircase, if anybody has to use it.
Oh, yes.
And then the other one.
Go ahead, you guys finish up. I have just a little question. I wish I knew a little bit more about it.
Were you able to load mine on, or do you need me to fire up my computer?
It's on here.
Super Bowl.
That should go for her.
One occasion where my mom said, yeah, she should be good to go. Get those over here.
So what do you need to hit to get to there?
You're approaching the police bar and you can't.
The next picture for, for Jennifer.
Yeah, yep, just
Sorry, I'm totally
the little,
Everybody around you. Hey, thanks for answering that question.
show me.
that's what. That
Okay.
right there next to the,
Got it.
zoom out.
Okay. All right. So I can just hit escape and it'll get me there.
It'll take you out of.
Well, now, when there is a bad search and the reputation's out there and they're really trying to doing it, they're coming back and saying, okay, I keep you and you didn't upgrade, and they're holding them responsible for it, which is going to be direct and most
We're seeing now in the accounting side,
yeah, no different than the Insuring.
And one of the things I heard you talk about, a lot of people get cyber attacked about the writer, and the writer that thinks for Jennifer.
Yeah, that's what it's called. That's called, I'm an attacker of real problem. I will just I laugh. And one bad thing, you're on the bed. We kind of do it, but I we're not stopping anything. That's like I said, we could claim on it.
You can share it. You won't try.
Oh, I am a walker.
All right, Amy from Travelers is going to start.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amy O'Keefe. I'm from Travelers Insurance. I am Travelers. Travelers is one of many carriers that have a cyber product. One thing that Bill and I were talking about just in the break is I'm going to be talking to you guys about a full cyber product, not an add-on where you get a little data breach on your GL policy, your general liability policy. Sometimes they'll tell you get a little $250,000. It's your cyber policy. I'm not saying it's bad, but that particular policy is only going to give you $250,000. You might have a loss. It might pay for notification, but it's not going to give you the services. Is it Julie? Jennifer, sorry. Of a true forensic law firm coming in to try and tell you, hey, yeah, you had a breach, and you have to notify these 500,000 people that they found records on that live all over the United States. That policy is not going to pay for her services. That go in and tell you that, oh, by the way, all of these states that were affected, or these people that live in these states, you have to notify per that state law. We don't care that you're located in Michigan and that's where the breach happened. So I want you to kind of think about this as I'm talking about. I am just talking about policy. Everything he talked about, I took notes on, and I'm just going to flip through half of this so fast you won't have to see it, is what you have to do at the beginning of the end. So hopefully my policy doesn't get touched. All right. I mean, the true cyber policy, the idea behind it is simply, we're just your down payment in the event when they get through, because they will. We're paying for your forensics. We're paying for your response, the breach response. We're paying for your reputational harm, the PR that has to get out there. That's what that, hopefully, at a minimum, $1 million policy is set up for, okay? We are not the Band-Aid. You need all three pieces in order to have a very strong defense against an attack that's most likely going to happen. Travelers calls it pre, post, always, and that's what we're trying to do, is bring all three of these pieces in together. Like I said, I'm just going to kind of run through this. Jennifer's going to talk about the regulatory. All of this, you're responsible for. So I'm just going to kind of, how breaches occur, touched on a little bit, your scam, phishing, ransomware, social engineering, or business email compromise. It's all going to be affected in what's covered under a good cyber policy. Only large organizations that are going to be attacked. Is that true? Very good. Right now, as he was explaining to you earlier, small to mid-sized companies are the biggest target for these bad people, simply because you're more vulnerable than the targets, even though they were hit, and that type of thing. And it is the human factor. And we all make mistakes. This is a big one. You outsource your data into a cloud. Are you less vulnerable because of that? What do you think? Show of hands. I send it to the cloud, I don't have to worry about it. Or nobody knows. That is your business. You own it. Oops, sorry. I like to say, I used to be a producer. I sit on the OVD side for many, many years. I called private or protected information. It's like a pollutant. If you work at all with any type of a pollutant, you own it cradle to grave. You cannot sign that right up. I'm taking it to the dump, and John Smith, who hauls toxic waste, is going to take it to that dump. I don't own it anymore. It's the same thing with identification. Anything that you collect, you own it, you took it in, you put it in the cloud, you still own it. Read your cloud contracts, it's very specific. It does not prevent you from saying, I don't have any breach with that. A breach can occur in that cloud, and it can affect your records, and a good cyber policy is going to respond to protect you as the company. True or false? And that's an old slide. Okay, we have seen the slide that Bill showed that, you know, companies going out of business. It's partially, it's that breach cost. This is probably what's going to hit with Jennifer more. Part of where your costs are coming in, legal forensic damage to your system, which is covered under good policy. Business interruption. This is a huge piece. When you think about a manufacturer says, I don't collect that much PII. I just don't have it. I've got 200 employees. That's my exposure. The ransomware that they're talking about, if they come into that system, how many people are here in manufacturing have their systems set up on a network? And they come in and they shut your system down and say, until you pay up, you're no longer producing a product. I've heard of this where there was a logistics company. Think about logistics, anybody here in trucking, where you're sending trucks, that's all computerized. If they get in and shut that down, that is a big business income loss. That is not covered under a standard, so they can call them electronic data processing policies anymore. So most of this is going to be who we are. I think the only companies that we do not insure at Travelers, if you're involved in any medical marijuana, that's just, other than that, we will underwrite pretty much any type of a company. Cyber insurance covers, hard to read, sorry, all of these triggers. This is what's going to trigger that event. You're going to have somebody unauthorized got into the data. Talked about that this morning. The virus goes through. We're going to failure to provide access into your system, failure to notify, which is if you don't notify, there's so many fines and penalties associated with that. The website and media. We're going to cover the systems, the data. We also cover non-electronic data. It's a very big misconception. Paper is another way that you can lose data. People still, I'm guilty of it. I have to print out everything. When I'm underwriting an account, I will print out their financials and everything. And if I happen to have that in my briefcase, and my briefcase is stolen and my laptop is stolen, nobody's going to get into this thing because we do have very good controls in place. But I have 5 files in there of major corporations that I'm doing underwriting on. All of that information, that's a data breach, okay? A little easier to handle because you know what you had in your briefcase. Employee data and corporate data is covered. I'm going to just kind of ignore that a little bit. What the policy covers, this is easier this way, is your privacy and security, media, things you put on your system, you put somebody else's logo on, you shouldn't have put it on, that type of thing. Regulatory. Once again, she's going to hit on this a little bit more, but the regulatory expenses and things that you're faced with, once a breach has occurred, changes daily. And it changes by state. It changes by the type of industry you're in. You take healthcare, you've just expanded into a much higher level of HIPAA violations. All of those, if there's a breach, come with fines and penalties. So we're not only talking about you lost this information, we have to notify, but then all those companies that I had kind of listed up on that mesh, they're coming in behind saying, here's my fine. And a good, after the event occurred, breach response team is going right along next to them. No, that's not a proper fine. They're helping keep your fines and penalties in check. They're, from that standpoint, because they're going to try and find what they can to take from you. Another fine area that is good, I'm sure you'll touch on it, is the payment card industry. If anybody in here is in retail or takes credit cards, that's a big area. There's fines and penalties that are imposed in that if there's a breach through your system. Once again, that's where regulatory is going to hit. Notification, computer and legal experts that we talked about here. Betterment, I'll get into that later. This is where a good policy is also going to pay for your data extortion, restoration, and public relations. We touched on it and said, what happens now? You're out here, look what happened with Target. It was an HVAC vendor that had the breach, and Target took the fall. I don't even know who the HVAC vendor was. And how many of you guys have agents or as business owners have noticed, especially if you're a contractor, you're finding out more and more the companies that you're working with are saying, we need to see that you've got, they're calling it anything, a cyber policy in place. And the reason they're asking for that is if the breach comes from your company into their system, Target is still responsible for their stuff, but they want to make sure you've got money over here to help pay for this breach, okay? And it's going to happen. Data restoration. Once you've had a compromise, you talked about an example where they lost 4 hours. That's time. And that's based on a good backup system. You don't have a good backup system, and you've got to have somebody come in, and it's a forensics. It's not, in most companies' cases, your IT guy or woman coming in and say, oh, I can find what was gone and restore it. It's a full forensic. The price tag's going up. This is what these policies cover. They also come in from a data and a breach thing. They're going to come in and say, okay, you had a breach. They're this good. IT people amaze me. They can go in and say, they didn't touch there. Oh, they touched here, notification. Didn't touch here, touched here, notification. So they're going in to see what exactly has to be paid. That's something that most medium-sized to small, even large companies are not in a position to pay for. So I'm just going to keep scaring you too. I'm going to touch on a couple things here. Funds transfer fraud. Somebody in here wanted me to touch on that. Bill talked about it. He called it business email compromise. And he is absolutely right. This is probably not one of, if not the one, biggest growing loss area. You're going to hear it called, no, I've not heard it called business email compromise. At Travelers, we call it social engineering fraud. There are other companies that call it false pretense fraud. And I bet everybody in here has had that email he talked about. You think it's from your boss or a vendor that you're used to working with. And they send you the email, hey, we switched bank routing numbers. Can you make sure that our new payment comes to blah, 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 blah. And you look at it, looks real, you send it, that's a social engineering fraud. And what that means is you just willfully parted with that money, okay? Social engineering fraud is covered on most cyber policies. As an endorsement, generally you're going to see it at $100,000. Travelers also includes it on our crime at $100,000. This is not something, you can get higher limits. I'm not going to get into all that, but the only way through a Travelers company that you're going to get a higher limit on that, on the crime side, is if you fill out an application and we see that you've got that authentic, what do you call it?
Dual factor.
You're doing, yeah. So, and it's not just, I see it, I email back and say, hey, Bill, are you sure about this? You don't want to email back to the person who emailed you. You don't want to use the phone numbers on the email. It's easy. You want to look up your vendor, that employee, that client, whomever it is. You want to call the number you know. We call that, in our industry, in Travelers, we call that a callback method. And that is truly, and I've said to all my agents, have them fill out a social engineering application. It's the best risk management tool you can do. If you answer no to anything, fix it. And just make sure you're implementing that. Because he's right, it's they're very tricky, they're very sneaky, and they know when to send it from a standpoint that you as the receiver are vulnerable, and the employee who supposedly sent it is vulnerable. There is a bank in West Michigan that will not transfer funds unless that banker talks directly to the person who authorized it. And this wonderful bank, when I was talking to the gentleman about it, and he said, I've had to call people out of a boardroom in a big meeting, and they're all pissed. And then suddenly it's like, hey, did you really want me to send this $100,000? And it stops it, okay? So really watch for that. Training is your best bet. All we are, once again, here's your $100,000. If you lost $500,000, and the next thing to keep in mind, once they've done that, they're in your system. So you got to kind of figure out where they are from there. Maybe. Okay, business interruption. We talked about this a little bit, was touched on. Business interruption you have on most of your insurance policies. You know, you get these lovely, huge, long worksheets. I hated them back in the day, and you fill it out to find out, if my building burns, how much money do I need to keep my business going so I can open my doors and be whole? From a standpoint of what we're talking about on business income, it's 9 times out of 10, it's that ransomware. It's anything that shuts your system down and you cannot do your business. Here's the example in Massachusetts of a big law firm. This is a big deal. And I don't think they went out of business, but they did not have an insurance policy for cyber. They felt it should have been covered under their electronic data processing policy, which comes with most of your insurance. That is, cyber stuff like this is specifically excluded from that. And I don't know if you said what the loss was. It was significant. And it was a big lesson. And I mean, they took insurance carriers to court to say you should cover this. So not only did they have the loss of income, the money they had to pay to notify, everything from the loss, they had legal fees just trying to, and nothing came of it. So business income is a real threat. If you're a retail manufacturer, they shut down your production line, you're stuck and you can't. And the way it happens, they talked about it with ransomware, a good cyber policy, including travelers, will include Bitcoin, virtual currency, and how we're going to pay it. The other thing to keep in mind on these ransomware account things that, like, they know, you know, yeah, we're good, we're going to pay you back, blah, blah, blah. The forensics companies work with these guys all the time, and they can kind of look at it. They have a whole network. They know, okay, this came from Russia, this group. We can negotiate what they're asking for ransomware and usually get it down so your costs are lower. This group from Russia, just pay it and move on, because if you try to negotiate and you're doing this on your own, they're just going to up the ante. So these forensic IT companies, they know what they're doing. When you buy a traveler's policy, we're your insurance thing. That's it. Not it. It's pretty big. Travelers does not provide the forensics. We outsource that. I mean, you have to use, and the forensic companies, they're few and far between. So it's not like Travelers is saying to you, oh, we had a loss. When you call in that loss, the minute you have had a loss, you get your number, you call it in, immediately they're getting a forensic team together. We call them breach coaches for the other piece. That's not a Travelers thing. We're bringing in the experts. We're just going to pay for it for you. There's your down payment. Another thing I want to kind of hit on, he brought up, right now watch, because you know, we're up trying to file for taxes, has your ID been stolen? Another thing for companies to keep in mind, that's a personal side of it is one thing. One of the biggest exposures in this first quarter is loss of W-2s. There was a college in Michigan that an employee got an email from the president, I don't know who sent the email. Hey, can you release these W-2s from this? It was over 1,000 W-2s that as she released them, realized, oh, shoot. Okay, so that goes beyond the 100,000. Those W-2s went out and did not go to where they were intended to go. Okay. He brought up colleges and universities. One good thing and or bad thing for colleges and universities, I should say, students, even, kindergarten on up, they have a huge student population. You get into college and universities, they have a huge alumni population, okay? And from that, they have people like me. When I went to college, I was Amy Jarman. I have moved, Lord knows how many times since I went to college as Amy Jarman, and now changed my name, got married, I'm Amy O'Keefe. If they only have my Amy Jarman information and there was a breach, I don't live in Granville anymore. They still have to notify me. That's what these policies do. Provide that notification money to pay for that most companies, and I don't mean it as an insult, you don't have the employees that know how to find that information to get that, where is Amy O'Keefe now so I can be notified. Okay, and so it's not just colleges, it can be hospitals, manufacturers, retail, from that standpoint. I took a couple notes that kind of tied in with what he was saying, what a policy is intended to do. One thing he mentioned was a secure network. Trust your IT department. Back in the day when cyber policies first came out, and I remember knocking on doors trying to sell it, we had 30-page applications. So today, these applications the agent's giving you, say thank you, because they were messy, ugly. Even IT people didn't even want to fill them out. And the IT department was the first one to say, we don't need that. I don't need this policy. Because they're fearing for, I'm keeping this secure, okay? Well, it's changed. The IT department now gets it. And they're gonna be your first backup. If you have somebody in your IT department coming to your business, into your C-suite, wherever, we need to shore up our security, listen. Because they know the vulnerabilities. And what's happening, I don't know if you've read it in the news or noticed it, what happens is the C-suite or the owner, depending on the size of your business, is becoming more and more vulnerable, okay? This is a cyber policy intended to cover in the event of a loss. It's great. You had a loss, it's covering it, we're going along, fancy and fast and great, this is really good. And all of a sudden, somebody catches wind, and they say, you know what? The security patch at Equifax, perfect example. Okay, they're pretty big. Where their cyber policy is, I don't know. You're dealing with a loss. You're dealing with notification. You're dealing with all that stuff. And all of a sudden somebody says, this guy's done this before. It's no different than an employment practice. He's notoriously not putting patches on. Or you ignored your IT department and didn't put proper protocol in place to make sure my stuff was protected. Now we're going to point in the direction of the board members, the CFO, CEO, CPA, doesn't matter. And we're going to say, I'm going to hold you liable for that. Okay, how many people in this room have a directors and officers policy? Good, because that policy could also come into play if it's at an event. That you, Mr. CFO, did the wrong thing by not having the right protections. So you've got the cyber policy covering this. Now we've come over here, and I know what D&O policy covers. It's your personal assets. That's what it's there for. And the decisions that you made, and check your D&O policy very carefully. More and more carriers are excluding cyber events. Travelers doesn't yet, who knows? So I guess all I want to say on this, there's insuring agreements, mine are going to be totally different. I'm going to call mine different than what Chubb does, what AIG does. That is probably the most confusing thing in the industry. We are getting better, trying to name things the same way so you understand what you're getting. Trust your agents, because the education that we're doing is carriers to the agents so they understand it. I'm constantly out teaching it, and they want to know. Trust your agents. Don't think just because somebody says, here's a great policy for you, and if, it might be you've got it from a different agent. Give it to your agent, let them look at it, let them tear it apart, let them make sure that it's going to do what it's intended to do. And like I said, all we are in an insurance policy is the down payment. That's what your annual cost is to pay for that end. Loss just hit. Now, I can only say this is my traveler's ad. We also have pre-breach services that everybody gets as a policyholder, not to the extent of what a Rehmann's going to do. I don't want to mislead anybody. It's all behind that. But small business, you can get some security testing and things like that. Confidential, it does not go to your agent, does not come to me as the underwriter. It is only your information to help you shore up your business. So if you can take away one thing on this with cyber, it's real. You will get hit. You probably even hit and you've got something just sitting there bubbling up. A good policy does not have a retroactive date. We're going to pay on discovery. We don't care when that was planted in. If you didn't have insurance back in that day when it came in through the email, a good, strong policy is still going to protect you. And here's the money. And then we bring the professionals in, which are right there. So I will be, and one last thing, this thing, is somebody asking, what in the world is that? There you go. I put it up here. We have Skype in our office now. A lot of companies, if you go in on a loss control survey, they're making you put these on the camera part of your phone. But I do this like yesterday at a Skype conference. I work from home. Nobody needs to see what I work from home. So it just covers your camera up. So if you, just a little take with you. Any questions, I'll be here. Go cyber.
Thank you, Amy. We'll take a very quick 2 to 3 minute break while Jennifer's preparing.
And here I've been using a Post-it to cover that camera.
You?
Cool. Yep.
Hey, perfect. About 3 minutes and we'll gather them.
Give me the high five.
No, I see them. If you're there early enough. So like whenever it's done. Is that the official venture?
Kind of like Eric.
A lot of things are looking at how we fly, but I think you guys when we get the application, we do all the things. We're doing for one of the guys. they kick him out, and then when they apply, they know that there's a lot. So that works well. Appreciate everybody wants to do a free.
We haven't.
We've been doing that. Now I we're not conflicted, but I'm very sure. Right. Because they need to be great too. Banks are fighting with it.
You know, one of my long-term roommates works for the identity. So she's been dealing with this for quite a while.
So we're seeing a lot of these municipalities, they're opting out now, and they're saying, some of them are actually saying, we'll do the processing and grow on. Okay. You can pick which place you want. If you're in a warehouse or an industrial area, let them do a grow on. As long as they're not selling that.
They're a lot greater.
Yeah. I figure what we're doing is making sure.
That's right.
Otherwise, we're still on
All right. Oh, is it? Oh, no, still working. All right, everybody, let's get started. Everybody's had enough coffee to be awake. So, and it's pretty rare that the lawyer gets to be the least scary of the three presentations on a day like this, but I'm Jennifer Poplava. I'm an attorney at Micah Myers. I'm going to talk to you about some of your legal obligations in connection with cyber risk and breaches, and how to protect yourself and minimize your risk. So I'll try not to duplicate what you've heard so far, but some of what I'll say you've heard sprinkles up through the prior two presentations. You know, this is a slide that I've included in these kinds of presentations for years now, because it used to, cyber protection and cyber liability used to be something that C-level officers would push to IT and say, oh, that's IT, that's tech, I don't have to worry about that. Everybody needs to be worried about this at every level of business. It is certainly an IT problem, but it's more than an IT problem. It needs to be a strategic business decision, how you're going to handle taking care of and protecting your data. And every business has personal information in one way or another. If it's just about their employees, that might be a limited subset, but many businesses have payment information or personal information about customers and clients and vendors, and so it really is something that every single business needs to be aware of. It's been a challenge for attorneys to give advice to clients, particularly those that are small businesses and not within the rubric of some sort of highly regulated industry. It's easy for me to talk to a healthcare client to say, okay, let's talk about HIPAA. It's easy for me to talk to a financial services client to say, okay, let's talk about the Graham-Lynch-Wiley Act or one of the other many regulations that apply. It's a little bit more difficult to talk to general businesses that aren't subject to one of those, because there isn't a broad federal security or privacy legislation that applies to absolutely everyone. So it's a little bit of a patchwork to try to determine what you have to do, and then there's a whole separate analysis regarding what you should do, because those two answers are not always the same. So this presentation will try to break things down to talk about what has to be done to protect personal information and confidential information, and I've abbreviated them PI and CI just for brevity. And we'll talk a little bit about what you may do with the information of others that you may have. We'll then talk about what you should do. So it's kind of optional. The law doesn't require it, but it's still highly recommended. And then we'll talk about why every business should have a security and a data protection program, why you should have a data security policy and a privacy policy, and why you should have a data breach response plan. So let's dive in. And if anyone has questions, just throw your hands up. This is a pretty informal presentation, so feel free to interrupt me if you've got questions as I plow through this. So what must businesses do to protect confidential information? As I said, there isn't a single U.S. law that covers absolutely every business. If you are in a highly regulated industry, there may very well be a statute that applies to you. And I'm not going to go into the weeds to talk about all the specific requirements of HIPAA and some of these other statutes and regulations. That can be its own presentation. Be aware that there are a lot of those laws out there if you are in one of those industries. Hopefully you already know that. State laws. There are some states that provide more guidance than others. In Michigan, we don't get a ton of guidance, at least yet. California, on the other hand, is pretty strict, and it's been that way for a while. California has laws in place talking about security measures that need to be taken. They have very specific verbiage in their statutes and in their regulations about privacy and what you can do with information that you collect about California residents. You may think that this, I'm in Michigan, this doesn't apply to me. Not necessarily true. The more that businesses have an online presence, you may in fact be collecting quite a bit of information about residents of other states. So it may be that you have to actually comply with the laws of other states. And that's something that can come as a surprise sometimes. Another huge issue, and I kind of like to get a show of hands before I get too in the weeds about this. Who here has heard of the General Data Protection Regulation from the EU? Not too many folks. Okay, then this is good because we'll talk about it in a lot more detail because a lot of my clients think, well, I don't really care what happens in the EU because I'm in America. The GDPR went into effect in May of last year, and it is basically a set of privacy rules that dictate what you can and cannot do with data about EU residents, and it applies to U.S. businesses a lot more than the data protection regulations in the EU did in the past. So it may be that you need to be worried about this, and I'll give you some information about that. So, and we're going to jump right into it. This came next. So anyway, these are the principles that the EU has set forth regarding protection of personal data. I'm not going to run through these specifically, but basically they are trying to impose greater protection for the benefit of the individual residents. So it imposes greater burdens on businesses that are collecting or storing or processing the data of EU residents. I won't go into this too much, but it's the way in which it has started to affect U.S. businesses. It used to be that if you weren't located in the EU, you didn't really have to worry about dealing with the EU data protection directive that used to be in place. Now, if you have a website, for example, and your website is translated into, let's say, German, because you have a customer base in Germany, you may well have to comply with this data protection directive. So even though you don't have a physical presence there, because you are directing your website at EU residents, specifically German residents, and you need to be paying attention to the EU directives, and there's a lot of complications that we'll go into in a minute. Those of you who have some familiarity with the way the EU data protection directives used to be set up, GDPR isn't an enormous difference from that. It broadens the scope, it goes a little bit deeper in the things that you have to do. And the reason that this is a big deal is that you can get an enormous amount of penalties for non-compliance. It's not just a slap on the wrist where someone contacts you and says, oh, you didn't comply with this, fix it and make it better. You can actually be tagged with fines up to 20 million euros if you are in violation of, and you'll also have to bring your program into compliance. So it is a much more efficient thing to analyze in advance whether or not you're subject to this and get your systems in order instead of reacting to it later when you get a nasty letter from someone over in the EU telling you you need to be paying attention. As I said, the territorial scope of this is broader. It does reach to U.S. businesses, doesn't reach to all U.S. businesses. If you have a website, that doesn't mean that you're automatically subject to the GDPR, even though people in the EU can see your website. It has to be directed. at the EU. So a translation is kind of the easiest way to say, yeah, obviously you're trying to target people because your website translates it into that language. If you have a regular business with a customer, let's say, who's located in the EU, I'll give an example that some of my clients have encountered. You know, independent contractors build websites for people. Sometimes they help them with analytics, and those people can be located anywhere. They don't have to meet them in person. So I might have an individual coder who builds a website for someone who's located in the EU. Just the building of that website wouldn't necessarily make them subject to this GDPR. However, if they are helping with the maintenance of the website, or they're collecting data, or they're processing it for them and then giving them the results, and if they're touching or manipulating the data, then they may be subject to some of the regulations. And so they now have to make a choice about, do I want to continue doing that work, knowing that I'm going to have this additional pain of complying with the things that this regulation is telling me I need to do, or do I want to narrow my scope? We've talked about scope. So the GDPR, you know, as with many regulations, says that you have to have appropriate technical and organizational measures in place. It doesn't really specifically say exactly what that means. Many of the states who have laws in place talking about security measures say that you have to use reasonable security precautions, but it doesn't actually define what those are. So lawyers like me have to look to cases where people have sued businesses that have experienced a breach to find out what kinds of reasonable security measures should have been taken, or what's considered reasonable and what's considered too much. Because let's face it, you can have the best, most expensive, most comprehensive security measures on the face of the earth, and you're probably still eventually going to get breached. It's just a reality. I mean, the hackers are always trying to keep up with all the technology. You're not expected under any of these laws or under any court analysis to successfully avoid a breach. You don't have to use the best and most expensive security measures in order to avoid liability. You just have to be reasonable. And what that means generally is you have to take a step back way before your breach and look at your system to decide, all right, what do I have and how do I need to protect that? What works best for me in my business? And we'll talk about that a little bit more. As I said, there's no single law in the U.S. that gives us guidance. Same analysis that I just discussed. Let's see here. Let's talk a little bit about the California Consumer Privacy Act, because I think that most U.S. businesses will eventually run into this at some point. This was just enacted last year. It doesn't go into effect until 2020. There's going to be amendments. There's going to be interpretations. There's going to be regulations, and there already have been. But the gist of the California Consumer Privacy Act is that basically California residents will have the right to request that a business that collects PI tell them what they're going to do with it. So if I run a website and I collect information about people who come to my website and information that they give me, I need to be disclosing to the person who visits my website what I'm collecting and what I'm doing with it. And it doesn't have to be necessarily at that point an individual disclosures. You don't have to say, hey, you John Doe, I'm collecting your name, your social security number, and what I'm going to do with it. It can be in the form of a privacy policy that's on the website. Easy breezy. I mean, most websites you go to these days have the privacy policy that no one reads, but that kind of policy can satisfy this obligation under the California Consumer Privacy Act. The more complicated issue, and the one that I'm telling clients they need to give thought to now, is that California also, similar to the EU, allows residents to say, yeah, I don't want you to have my personal information anymore. Now you need to delete it. Complicated, especially if you say, well, I don't know how I'd do that. I'm telling you now, you need to give thought to how you do that. And anyone who has already tried to wrestle with compliance with the GDPR, that's the biggest hurdle. It's not so much the putting out of privacy notices or the security measures. It's operationally trying to figure out, how am I going to track what I have, and how am I going to extract it and delete it if I'm requested to do so? And there are solutions out there. I'm just a lawyer, I'm not a techie, so I can't tell you how to make that happen. You need to give it some thought. If California residents or EU residents' data is something that you will process or own or touch or store. You got some time for California, like I said, a whole year, no problem, right? Some other consumer privacy legislation has been popping up in other states. I put a summary here. I'm not going to get into it terribly much, but eventually, I think the U.S. will go the way of California and the EU, especially with all of the publicity involved with these huge breaches. There will eventually be successful legislation that requires that businesses take care of personal information about U.S. residents. We got a ways. We're not getting there anywhere soon, but it does not hurt to start now, because you will find that we get there stepwise, especially with all of these other states coming up with legislation requiring that people take reasonable security measures and that they track data and that they give the privacy notifications. Best to start now than to wait until all this hits and then you're caught flat-footed because you don't know what you have and you don't know what you're doing. I'm thinking that we'll probably make the slides available if we haven't already. Is that something we can do? Big list here of what the rights are under the GDPR. You'll notice it's in very small print because there are a lot, but the general gist of it is you have to have a reason to collect this data, or you have to have consent to collect data about European Union residents. And then you have to take care of it. You have to give it back, or you have to delete it upon request, which again, I would say is probably the most difficult thing that my clients encountered to date. And if you have a presence in the European Union, you may be required to appoint a data protection officer. Hopefully, if you have that physical presence, or if your business really does reach into the EU a lot, that's something that you've already considered and analyzed. And if not, let's talk about it.
I would suggest, Jennifer, one of the things about the PI under GDPR is it's much broader. For in the United States, like your email address is not always considered PII, personal identifying information, but under the GDPR, even if you maintain somebody's email because they went on your website, that's considered PI, and then you have to delete it wherever it exists in your system should they ask.
That's a very good point. Now, I want to get into that a little bit more. And it's not just personal emails. It could be, there have been some interpretations that have said that if there is a business email that helps identify an individual, then that could be PI. And that's not saying that you have to necessarily delete everything. If you're in business with someone and they're a customer and they come to you and say, delete all my information, but you have an outstanding invoice, you have a contract with that person, so this doesn't prevent you from enforcing your contract with them. There are ways under GDPR to retain the information. It kind of depends on the reason that you collected the information. I mean, if you just collected it because you wanted to track and you don't have a business relationship with them, then if they ask you to delete it, you don't really have a reason to retain it, and so you have to delete it. But if you have an ongoing business relationship with them, then the GDPR will allow you to continue to have that relationship. You know, they can't just torpedo your relationship by invoking GDPR. It's a little complicated, I realize. I'm getting some looks like, oh my. It's a mess. It's a mess. And I'm finding that businesses are unfortunately a little bit late to the party on this. You know, I've had clients come to me and say, oh, you know, I'm doing business with this company in the EU and they just gave me this document that they want me to sign and I'm not doing any of this stuff. And I think, yeah, that's a problem. You need to, you know, you need to get up to speed on this. So if you think that there's any way that you are touching or storing or processing data from an EU resident that involves an EU resident, then you really do need to consider whether or not you have data that falls under the GDPR. And we'll talk a little bit about what you can do to analyze that in a minute. Let's see. Okay, actually, I'm going to back up. So what should you do? What should you do to protect confidential information? Internal governance. I mean, this is probably number one. You know, as I said, it's not an IT issue, it's a business issue. So you need to have your business leaders involved in the analysis of what you need to do, what you should do, and what you may do. You need to understand what information you have. Okay? I mean, and that may seem simple, but you know, it may be that only IT understands what information is coming in. And the worst time to try to undertake this analysis is after you've had a breach and you need to figure out who you need to notify. You might realize at that point, oh my God, I have information about people in all kinds of different countries. And I've had a client this happened to, and I'll talk about it in a bit. You want to understand in advance what you have, what level of sensitivity that data might have, where you store it, and what you do with it. You have to use, as I said, reasonable information security measures. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And document vendor obligations. I just think that that's probably the easiest thing to do, and yet one that clients don't. If you have vendors that are handling your data in any way, like that HVAC vendor with Target, make sure that when you enter into a contract with them, you do due diligence to make sure that they have their ducks in a row, and put in some contractual obligations that say that they will make you whole if they screw up or they lose data, or because, you know, as she was saying, the data obligations, to the extent that you are the owner of the data that you're collecting, that's regardless of whether or not downstream someone loses that data, the notification obligations are yours. You've got to do it. Unless you have a contractual provision with a vendor, you've still got to send the notifications, even if the vendor is the one that got hacked and caused the breach. So getting your contracts in order is incredibly important. And again, it's probably the easiest of all these things to do.
I'm just going to ditto on what she's saying. We have that specific question on our application that asks if you're using vendors with contractual. I can't say it off the top of my head what the question is. I bet unless I'm dealing with 90% of the time, no, is checked. They don't have it in place, and I agree. I'm looking at. It's easy.
It is easy. I mean, yes, you have to pay a lawyer to look at it sometimes. Trust me, it is far cheaper to hire a lawyer to help you document a deal or an arrangement than it is to react to a breach. Far cheaper, far cheaper. And a lawyer should be able to ballpark for you. If you're just reviewing a contract, I know, particularly if I'm dealing with an isolated contract, I can usually say, okay, I think it'll take me X number of hours to look at this. Like if I'm just reviewing language and kind of giving my up or down, I can usually ballpark how much that's going to cost. That's a definable number. Dealing with the aftermath, I mean, you can't estimate how long that's going to take because it all depends on the other party and how, you know, cooperative or uncooperative they're going to be. And I've had a number of clients say to me, well, but the other side's never going to change that language. I mean, it's not worth asking because they're never going to change it. You know, surprisingly, they do. I mean, and I've negotiated contracts with some very, very big companies, and I've had one in my entire 20 years practice that has said, no, the contract is what the contract is, and we're not changing it. One. So, yeah.
Question, most of us have customer portals.
Okay.
That allow our customers to get in, check inventory levels, order process.
Yep.
I mean, how many people have a contract with their customers?
What do you mean, how do people have a contract?
Well, I mean, that deals with cyber. I mean, if they're in your system.
Yep. Terms and conditions, right on the portal. By accessing it. I assume that they have like a login or something, you have a process. As part of that login process, you say, these are the terms of your access. And this is what we allow, and this is what we don't. These are the steps we take. That's your agreement about about their access. And the privacy policy is usually included within that. Now, you have a separate contract with whomever is operating the portal. Like if you're not doing that in-house, if you've got a third party that's hosting or maintaining, that's a separate agreement. But yeah, the contract between you and the people who are logging in, terms and conditions. Yeah. And like I said, having the privacy policy be part of that, you know, some people have them separate, you can combine them. I mean, the best case, and I'm guessing that everyone's probably up to speed with electronic contracting, but you don't have to get a wet signature from them in order for it to be an enforceable contract. Posting it, you know, if you can push out a notification that they have to click, that's ideal. It's not necessary, but it is best practice because then you can track that they've actually done something to affirmatively say, yes, I've read this, I agree with it. Yeah. But I mean, in my clients that have, that don't have quite as interactive of a website will sometimes just do it via a link, or they'll have a pop-up that you have to minimize, but you don't necessarily say I accept. I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb and say all of you have seen in the past year on websites you visit the pop-ups that say, we have a new privacy policy, and, you know, how many of you actually read those? Okay? You just minimize and go, you know, you minimize, put it away. But it's important, you know, the companies put that pop-up out there so they can say, yeah, we put this out there, someone minimized it, but we put them on notice that by using the website, they were subject to these terms, and that's binding upon them. And that courts have said that that's enforceable. Other questions before we keep going? All right. So compliance checklist. And again, you'll want to get copies of these slides because you can use these last few to kind of march through how you tackle this internally. First step, assign roles and responsibilities and start with management. Don't delegate this to IT and say, get us, you know, get us all set, because the decisions about spending, contracting, the tasking, that has to come from management, not IT. Determine whether or not you have to have a data protection officer. If you don't have that presence in the EU, the answer is probably going to be no, but still go through the analysis if you do deal with EU resident data. Incorporate your data protection risk into your corporate risk management and your internal controls. I mean, certainly you have business strategy planning, even in small companies. It may be planning with a party of one, but it still is a process. It doesn't need to be a complicated process, but the important thing is that you have done it and that you've actually given it thought. And train your personnel, as I mean, and that really is one of the most important things to do, at least from a protection standpoint from hackers. In addition to the reasonable security measures, you got to train your personnel on what to look for. And it is tricky. And I mean, my law firm gets barraged with these emails, the spear phishing. It's just, we've had paralegals get emails from senior partners saying, I'm at the cottage, I need you to do this or do that, and it looks completely legitimate. And fortunately, we've pushed out the messaging, and we've done the breach testing where we've sent email, we've had Rehmann send out emails to our staff to find out who would click the link, and it's got to be nonstop. It has to be an ongoing process, because these intrusion attempts have become so sophisticated that it is easy for people to fall for it. Understanding your PI, as I mentioned, you got to know what you have in order to figure out how to protect it. It may be that all the information that you have is really public information. Not likely, but it's possible. Like, let's say that you work for a municipality and bus schedules is something that you have on your website. Public information, not so worried about it. I don't know what that means. How many minutes do I have? I'm at 30. Oh boy. Okay. I'm gonna go even faster than I was. Sorry, guys. Assess whether or not you need to have an actual formal assessment put together. If you have very confidential, very personal, very sensitive information, if it would really impair your business or really ruin the lives of people who own this information, if it was breached, then you may need to have a written assessment put together. Again, this could be something that you outsource. It may be at the level where you want to do it internally, at least to start, just to try to understand what you have. Privacy policy. Everyone needs a privacy policy. I'm sorry. I used to say that if you have a website and you're not really doing anything with it, you don't need a privacy policy. Yeah, you do. Because if you have a website, you're probably using Google Analytics to see who comes to your website. Even if you're not taking information other than those Google Analytics, Google requires you to have a privacy policy. And people don't realize that because they don't read the Google terms and conditions. You do need to have a privacy policy. It is not rocket science to put together a privacy policy. You need to have one. If you are collecting information, or if you're subject to California law or EU law, your privacy policy will get more complicated. Still need to have one. Notices and consents. Once you understand what information you have, you'll figure out whether or not you need to get consent from people about use of their information. And then you can figure out how to get that consent. Some of it may be, I mean, I have some clients that require registration when people access their site. Others, you know, they have a click the box, you know, or minimize the box type notification. And we represent some small local governments. They still do some stuff like this on paper. Like they'll have people, you know, they'll give them a paper form like I consent to this, and then they jump online. So important to get that consent somehow in some circumstances. This summarizes some of the reasonable security measures. As I said, there's no set security measure list. This summary I've kind of pulled from case law to talk about some of the things that courts have said, yeah, that would have been reasonable, or yes, this is reasonable. Encryption is always reasonable. Usually courts will see, is your information encrypted? And boy, I don't know if I want to try to blow through the response to security breach. I spent more time on this than I thought. Sorry about that. But if you have encrypted information that you are storing and you have a breach, and you can show that, hey, my stuff was encrypted, the person who intruded didn't have the key, you may not have to send out breach notices under some state laws. Because some states say, unless you can reasonably determine that someone actually accessed the information, then really you don't have to give those breach notices as to those people. And the distinction that I try to draw to people who don't understand tech is this. If you have someone that comes in with ransomware, it could be that they just slap a lock on your front door so you can't access anything in your house. If that happens and they haven't accessed anything, you don't have to send breach notices out to the affected individuals who might have information stored within your house. However, if you find that the intruder has kind of climbed into your house and pawed through your underwear drawer, that's something that you need to actually tell people about, because the intruder has actually gone through and touched the data, and so some harm might reasonably come from that. Vendors, as I said, please make sure your vendors are contractually obligated to take the same steps you are to protect safety. Breach response, I have let me find it here. On the table here, when you leave, I've left copies of a breach response checklist that goes through the things that you should do when you have a breach. Before you need to use that though, and what I tell my clients to do is to look at this look at the checklist before you have a breach, so that you can develop a plan before a breach even happens. It's kind of like, think of it like an emergency evacuation plan, okay? You know, if there's a fire, what do? Do you know? Remember grade school, like you'd have the tornado drills, you knew, you know, if the bell went off, you go out, get your book, and you sit in the hallway with the book over your head. You have to think that way for data breaches. Give some thought to who do you contact, what do you do, where do you go, what's your next step, because you do not want to be in the situation where you've had a breach and you don't have insurance, so you don't have an insurance carrier to contact. You haven't developed a relationship with outside tech, so you don't know who to contact there. Or if you contact them, you're not high on their list because you're not an existing client. So, you know, they might help you, but not so quickly. Or a lawyer, you know, if you don't have an established relationship with a lawyer before a breach, again, you know, it's harder to get an attorney to drop everything for a new client than it is if you have an established relationship. So start thinking about these things before a breach. Also, if you have a breach notification policy, there are some states that will say, okay, we know that we have our own statute that tells us you have to do X, Y, and Z in your notice. If you have a breach policy, though, we'll just let you comply with that policy. You don't have to follow the stupid specifics of our statute. And I will tell you, 49, I think it is, states have different statutes about responding to a breach. And if you don't have a policy, you will pay an attorney like me to pour through the language of all these statutes to figure out, okay, so for California, your breach notification has to say this on the top and it has to be in this format, but you can't include that language in the breach notification for Massachusetts. That has to be worded in a totally separate way. It is ridiculous. So having a breach policy in advance simplifies a lot of that, because you can then have one standard form notice that you send out to the affected individuals, and it simplifies things. And yes, please do get insurance, because I've had clients who, none of them have gone out of business, but it is a ridiculous amount of money to respond to a breach and send notices out, because it's not as simple as, okay, we print out the notice and we send it. You have to comply with language, font, mailing method. You have to determine who you're sending this to. Some of them you have to include credit monitoring. Some of them you don't. So if you don't want to provide it to everybody, you can't have the same notice go to everybody. It's a hot mess. It's a hot mess. So definitely think about this in advance. This is basically mirroring what I have in the checklist. So because you have that as a takeaway, I won't get into it too much. Your first call, I will say, should be, and you can pick the order. If you have an insurer, call the insurer. Sometimes the insurer will want to determine what lawyer you use. So if you have cyber insurance, call your insurer. If you don't have cyber insurance, well, you need to contain the breach. So you need to get your forensic team or your IT team on board immediately to stop the breach. But you also need to have an attorney involved right away, because having an attorney involved in the conversations that you have with the forensic people might make your conversations covered by attorney-client privilege, so that someone can't get a hold of those later if they try to sue you for damages resulting from the breach. Let's see. Triggering notification. Not all states require notification just because there's been a breach. As I said, some of them require access, some of them require risk of harm. It's an analysis. That's why the forensic investigation is so important, because, you know, I hate to say this, and as individuals it's a little bit horrifying, but as a business owner, you don't want to have to provide a notice of a breach. I mean, you want to avoid it if you can, okay? So if you're able to get forensic information that tells you, yeah, they didn't go through the underwear drawer, they just slapped a lock on it and they didn't actually get inside, then you don't have to go through the process of sending out notices under 50 state and foreign law. So it's an important thing to collect the information that will allow your attorney to analyze whether or not you have those obligations. Let's see, who has to be notified? Generally the owners of the information, and again, cradle to grave, if you've got the information, if you own the information, the fact that someone else down your stream is the cause of the breach doesn't relieve you of your obligations. Unless you've got a contractual provision, you're still required under state law to provide the notices. You can perhaps enforce a contractual provision that makes a third party do it or pay you, compensate you for doing it, but the onus is still on you as the data owner to provide the notification. In most states, there are some states that are different, but, you know, again, different laws in every state. If you get permission in advance, in some states from residents, you can send the notices by email. Most of the time it has to be snail mail, which is a giant pain, because who mails things, right? Someone mentioned that earlier. There are, in most states, the opportunity to provide notice by posting. Again, not ideal. You don't want to put that up. You've seen it. I mean, Target, I mean, everyone probably was affected by the Target breach in some way. I know I got a mail notification and they put it on their website. It may be that they do that because they don't have all the information for all the people stored in their records. Some states are really ridiculous with their timelines. I will tell you 30 days might seem like a lot of time. It's not, especially if you don't know what you have. If your forensics team is trying to figure out what happened, 30 days is a very short turnaround. There's actually one state that has is it 15 or 7? 5, 5. Fortunately, I haven't had clients that have had records subject to that, but if you have documents or data that relate to businesses licensed with the Connecticut Insurance Department, you have to notify them within 5 days. Just craziness. That's a ridiculous time frame. And if you don't comply with these statutes, you're subject to fines. You may not be subject to lawsuits. It's actually a little bit difficult to successfully sue someone personally for a data breach, but you can be subject to regulatory action. The FTC can come after you. That can get very expensive. And the cost of remediation is really where a lot of people suffer. The notice, as I said, state laws differ. Oh, I'm running out of breath trying to talk so fast. Let's see, all of this talks about what needs to be in your breach notice. And again, it depends on what state governs your situation. So if you have data about residents in all 50 states, you have to comply with the law of all 50 states. Other items. So have your incident response plan in place before your breach so that you know what to do when a breach actually happens. The checklist, as I said, please take it with you. My name and my email are on it if you have questions. And I'll be sticking around after I have some water to answer any other questions that you might have. Sorry I ran over.
We could have Bill come back up and Amy, and if you don't mind staying up here, we can have whatever questions there may be for the panel
I feel
today.
like a target on my forehead. Yeah.
So when you go to a hotel and you use their Wi-Fi, and I once looked at their terms and conditions, there were 76 pages.
Yep.
Basically, it said, anything you put through here is ours.
Yep.
What liability do they have if that falls to them?
If they've processed the information, well, it kind of depends. I mean, if they're actually collecting and storing that information, then they have a responsibility to secure it. If it gets hacked just by virtue of being on their Wi-Fi and they haven't actually processed or used it, then they would probably argue that they don't have liability. I don't use public Wi-Fi.
But even just your email on your phone or something, couldn't possibly.
I use my hotspot on my phone, but I mean,
Nobody, actually, you should never,
Yeah.
never use hotel Wi-Fi or Panera's or any of these things here because you're exposed. Number one, Google was actually sued. Anybody have Gmail? So when you sign into Gmail, you give them permission to use anything. And some woman saw her photos that she had in her email cache that Google was using as an advertisement and sued Google saying, why did they have it? And they pulled out the terms and conditions and she gave them permission.
Yeah.
She clicked on that. I agree.
Like Facebook.
So you really don't have too many rights here. The answer is I carry the 5G, 4G with me and everything. I never sign into those things here. I'm always worried that the kid in the corner at Panera's, he's there 6 hours a day. What's he doing there?
And they do.
For somebody to come in so that he can pop onto their system.
And a great example of this, I mean, I've been to expos where they will give a public Wi-Fi and there will be people from like WatchGuard or other vendors that'll walk around hacking into people's, because people have signed into the public Wi-Fi. Don't do it. I know it's a pain. Don't, yeah.
Sorry, one other question. On the ransomware, what percentage of insured people, I mean, in the insurance companies, actually wind up paying ransom?
But if they're insured and they're actually getting it, they're paying it.
Really?
Yeah. They're paying it because here's the thing. The forensic team know much more than I do. They know who is sending that ransom. They know about these companies. They've dealt with them. They've seen them. There are times they're going to say, we're not going to pay this. I'm sorry, we're not going to pay this. We're going to figure this out because they're never going to give us the information. Okay. There are times where they're coming back and saying, hey, we can negotiate to get this price down. There are times they know they can't negotiate. There are times they look at it and they say, we got to pay it, but the information they're giving back to, I'm going to use the wrong term here, decrypt or get that ransomware to unlock that is so overwhelming. So, generally the forensic company that's going through this, they know what they're dealing with. And
Typically, the insurance company pays it if it's feasible.
it's actually going to be the
The answer to that question is,
the company's going to pay it.
I'm like Jennifer, my first day of law school, they told me the two most important words of being a lawyer is it depends.
And that's totally true.
Yeah, so a lot of it is, if they're only asking for $800 and you're fairly confident you're going to get the key back, all right, do what you got to do here. But nowadays, as we see, there's so much competition among the bad guys that their prices are going up because they may only give it in one time or anything like that. So if it's a $200,000, then there's a difference between whether or not you want to pay when you want to pay.
And I'm skeptical. I don't trust the bad guys at all. I would much rather have a client restore from a backup, scrape everything clean and just restore from your backup than assume that the bad guy is going to do as they're saying and actually remove the lock without getting into your system.
Well, I know your underwriting questionnaire is pretty extensive, and you have to run all that, so that's reflected.
Well, and truly, too, when you're looking at these applications for it, that's also where, you know, you were talking about incident response plan and recovery plan. We're asking these questions to find out, first of all, are we even going to give you business income? I don't mean to be cruel or rude or mean about it, but right down to if you don't have an antivirus and a firewall, we're not going to give you insurance. You know, that's the stuff we're looking at on the GDRP program. Depending on what your business is and what you're doing, we're going to ask those questions. Do you have to comply with it? Yes, I do. Have you put the steps in place to comply with it? No, we haven't. Are you going to put the steps in place to comply with it? No, we're not. That's an endorsement onto our policy that we're going to say, we're not going to give you this endorsement to cover the fines and penalties for that. So same with the ransomware. The best answer is it does depend. But when you're filling out the application and you start saying no, 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 is when you're either going to, if you get the insurance coverage from us and you're paying an exorbitant amount, it's because, you know, we could get enough underwriting to give you a policy, but you're paying more. The more controls you have in place, that premium, I mean, I can tell you across the board, not just travelers, but the more secure you are, these premiums are coming down and at a fast rate. But we are going to see what you put in place. And I've come back to my agent and said, hey, I can give them better coverage or a much better premium, just make sure they put A, B, C, and D into place.
Yeah, we actually, again, I hesitate to sell at these things, so my boss told me I should here. We actually go into firms and we do 360-degree, call them a 360-degree IT assessment, where we'll go in, we'll look at your posture, we'll do the white hat hacking, we'll do the social engineering, everything, and our report then can be provided to your insurer, and then that would impact the premiums, because they say, man, you know, Rehmann came in and they said you're very secure, or they identified your vulnerabilities. Have you fixed them? And if you've done that better here, then that might influence your insurance policy and how that works out here too. So I would suggest it's not for us or somebody else to come in and do those assessments for you. It's well worth the money.
And it's much cheaper in the event that you do experience a breach and you have to respond to a regulatory agency. And I'll give an example, a fairly recent example. Client, very small medical provider. They practically non-profit. They experienced a breach and they had to respond to an inquiry from Department of Health and Human Services. OCR sent them a letter saying, all right, you know, give us all your policies. And they ended up having to redo a number of their policies or update a number of their policies to bring them into compliance with current law, because they had been drafted, you know, like from a form book, basically, years past, didn't take into account the evolving technology. So, no, it took more time for me to respond, update the policies and respond to the inquiry than it would have taken for them to send all the policies, to review them all and have me, you know, do them from the start. It's always more expensive to be reactive as opposed to being proactive. And businesses have in past been reluctant to take this on because they say, oh, it's so expensive, you know, it just doesn't seem worth it. I can't convince my CEO that this is important. And I mean, I tell people, you know, there are plenty of horror stories to show your CEO to say, listen, you know, we don't want to go out of business. We want to be able to deal with a situation if it comes up. And it's not really optional anymore. It's something that you really need to be handling proactively.
IT security is a revenue generator. I mean, you have to think of it. You guys know what revenue is. It saves your money. Mm-hmm. It really does. The better your posture, it's going to save you on your policies. It's going to save you on paying Jennifer or I to come in here too. It's necessary, and it's going to get. When GDPR hits the United States, it's already hitting us, but it's going to be worse. And there's already legislation forming on nationalizing reporting requirements and things. They've been working on that for years. It's just going to get worse before it gets better. You guys, it's a fairly young crowd. you're going to be in the business for a long time. You're going to see a lot more changes. I'm going to be retired sitting on my lake house, laughing about everything I read in the mail.
No Wi-Fi, no
Right.
internet.
Stone Age.
Question. You mentioned a lot about third parties, right? And so now we want to have electronic signatures on a lot of our contracts, or I should say bids. Now, let's say we want to entertain like an Adobe sign or something like that, a third party. All this information is being shuttled through them and back to us.
Okay.
What's our responsibility for them not scraping all of our customer information, databasing it, using it for their own purposes, unknown to us?
You need to have an agreement with them, and you probably do, even if you don't realize it.
But how do we know that? Is there even a compliance body for that? I mean, there's PCI compliance.
There's PCI compliance.
Is there anything like that?
If you're talking about purely electronic signatures, I mean, I'd be stunned if this company doesn't have some sort of terms of use. And I mean, it really is a tool that you all need to utilize with your own clients and customers. I guarantee that this electronic signature, that you are already bound by some terms and conditions. You need to find those. They're probably on their website. Okay? Pull them up. If they're not acceptable to you, tell them this is not acceptable to us. Have an addendum signed, and then they, you know, and that document should. Most of these companies who are in this business, if they're an established company, they will have privacy language in these terms and conditions. But no, there isn't. I mean, unless they're dealing with extremely sensitive information like financial, like health, they're not covered under those federal statutes.
There's no body of, I don't even know what term to ask, like PCI or anything like that.
That's for the electronic signature.
We're under blah, so you don't have to worry because it's already been vetted out by a third party.
I mean, no, I'm going to say probably not. There are ways to, you know, they could say that they're in compliance with certain ISO, or they can say that they, you know, the U.S. isn't part of some of the privacy shield initiatives that the EU has put forward. If this is a U.S. business, it probably can't say that. There are some corporate standards that have been approved by some EU bodies, so probably not. I mean, individual companies can take advantage of some of these things, but I wouldn't be able to answer that without knowing the company itself. But no, there's no U.S. law that covers just companies that do electronic signatures. Unless I'm really
outside of the purpose for what we're employing you to do.
I mean,
Gathering
FTC. I mean, if they're doing an unfair or deceptive trade practice, and if they're, you know, saying they're doing one thing and they're doing another, it's welcome to my world. Yes, everything is gray. Everything depends. Yeah.
Some of that information that you possess, if they were able to breach the wall and get information, it can be considered intellectual property or proprietary information, and there's legal ramifications about them accessing information that they shouldn't have rights to. So there might be, this will be solved, if not by some federal statute, by litigation.
Right.
The lawyers will find it out, and somebody will win or lose, and everybody will know how to work it out in the future if it's not already ongoing.
Right. I mean, and states have, you know, Michigan has a Trade Secret Act. So if they are, you know, going in and stealing your trade secrets, then you have a course of action against them. But that's, you know, it's complicated. It's not like the Trade Secret Act doesn't set out a standard of conduct as you're describing. It's just, it's, you know, basically a law saying thou shalt not steal trade secrets. I mean,
You got to prove harm somehow.
you do. You have to prove harm. You have to prove that it's a secret in the first place. And in order to prove it's a secret, what do you have to have? Reasonable security procedures. I've had clients say, someone, you know, an employee left my company and they ripped off all my trade secrets, and now I want to sue them and I want to get all my stuff back. And if they didn't have any security measures in place, they are out of luck, because the first thing court will look at is, all right, what did you do to keep this stuff secret? And if the company says, well, you know, what do you mean? That's not a good place to be when you're trying to prosecute one of those things. And it has to be more than just, we put a lock on the door, you know, reasonable security measures.
You would think that big U.S. national companies would worry more about protecting their information, but I'll go back. I hate telling too many stories, but my FBI days here too, there was a company, an international company that was building a factory in India, and we went to them and told them, we know for a fact they're targeting you, they're putting employees in there, they're going to be stealing all your intellectual property. And their response was, yeah, we know. We figure
and we're good for about 5 years before they can mirror what we're doing and steal our technology and compete with us. But the cost of labor and everything for us, we're going to make so much money in those 5 years that we're willing to take that risk and we'll let it go. And it's just like, you can't protect them from themselves sometimes, and they're willing to do that. So it's all about the bottom line and money, and what do you do at that point in time? So they know it's happening, and they do it anyway. It's the same way in China and places like that.
I think we're getting the hook.
We're over by 15 minutes. Sincere apologies. Just real quick, our agency sees breaches weekly, monthly from clients. Some have policies in place, some don't. We highly encourage you, talk to the panel here afterwards, get a policy in place to protect yourself. We want to thank you guys all for coming and presenting. Thank you for braving the roads and coming. We're going to be doing monthly seminars here at our office. There's a little card like this on the desk over here where you checked in. There's also flyers from Travelers and Jennifer's checklist, which I think is great. So thank you. I'll drive home, back to work safely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Love your nail polish color.
Nice job. So are you driving back now?
Yeah, I have a dinner meeting.